I told him I was leaving. He wants me, and I want him, but what he did next shocked me. I've been a long-time lurker on this app, but this is my first time actually posting. I've never really been the type to share personal stuff online, so I'm honestly surprised that I'm sitting here typing this out. However, I feel like I need to share this, as it might help me make sense of it all and how to save my marriage. My name is Alice, I'm 35, I'm a 35-year-old woman, and my husband, who I'm about to divorce, is 33. We met at university, and it was love at first sight. We got on really well from the start. People used to say we were the perfect couple, the kind everyone envied. We had that spark and deep connection where we just got each other. You know the type. It felt like a romantic comedy. James has always been the responsible one, the planner. He works in cybersecurity and is also a trust fund kid. We've never really had to worry about money. Life has always been good for us financially. We were set. For a long time, I thought we had everything we could ever want. For most of our marriage, I was a stay-at-home wife. At the time, I was happy to stay at home and take care of the house and our social life. James was able to support us both financially, which was ideal. I never planned on becoming a housewife, but it made sense at the time. James made enough for both of us, and he preferred it that way. He worked while I stayed home and took care of the house and our social life. For a while, it felt like that was enough. As time went on, I started feeling restless. I felt like something was missing, but I didn't know what it was. That's when things started to go wrong. I began to doubt everything, including myself. I couldn't shake this feeling that I had somehow lost a part of me. In the process of trying to, I made the biggest mistake of my life, when I decided to figure out who I was outside of being James's wife. Before I get into all of that, I need to explain what led up to this decision, because I know looking back how stupid it was. I let someone else come between us and make me think that there was something more out there for me. I let my insecurities and desire for something different blind me to what I already had. Things were great between James and me until they weren't. We had been together for years and it felt like we were living the dream. We had the perfect relationship, at least on the surface. We traveled and we had a beautiful home and hosted dinner parties where friends would marvel at how in sync we were. People would tell us how lucky we were to have found each other, and I believed it. I really did, but over time, something started to shift. I didn't even realize it at first. It wasn't a sudden change. There wasn't one specific moment I could point to where everything went wrong. It was more like this slow creeping feeling that grew inside me, little by little, until it was too big to ignore. I felt stuck. It was like I had given up some part of myself when I married James. It was like I felt like I'd lost my independence and freedom, even though I didn't realize it at the time. The worst part was that I couldn't figure out why I felt that way. On paper, everything was perfect. We had a great life and James treated me well. He was loving, generous, and never once gave me a reason to feel like something was missing. But I couldn't shake this feeling that there was something more out there for me. I had given it up in the process of becoming James's wife. I started thinking back to who I used to be before we got married. Back when I had my own job and sense of purpose. Before I became the stay-at-home wife. I was at a loss. I want to make it clear that I chose to take on the role of a housewife. It wasn't forced on me. After years of living like that, though, I felt like I'd disappeared. I'd look in the mirror and wonder who I'd become. I wasn't Alice anymore. I was James's wife. That's how everyone saw me. Eventually, it's how I saw myself too. My whole identity was wrapped up in being his partner and living his life. I realized that I didn't know who I was outside of that, so I started questioning everything. I began to resent the life I had once been so happy with. I started thinking about all the things I could have done differently, all the dreams I had put on hold. And the things I could have done, and the things I could have explored if I hadn't settled down so quickly and given up that part of myself. I gave up so much of myself to be with James. The feeling of missing out and having given up too much of myself grew stronger every day. It consumed me. I started looking for answers in places I shouldn't have. Instead of talking to James about what I was feeling, I pulled away. I convinced myself that he was the reason I felt trapped, that he was the one holding me back. I was the one who let myself feel like I was losing my identity, I was the one who didn't speak up and let the resentment build. Instead of dealing with it in a healthy way, I made a very stupid choice that would end up shattering everything we had built. I thought that things would get better if I left James. I didn't used to think like this, but back then I was really restless and dissatisfied. I thought that if I walked away from James, everything would magically fall into place. I thought I needed to find myself again, and for some reason I believed that meant I had to get away from James. That's where Mike came in. I met Mike at the gym. It was innocent at first. We started off just having casual conversations during workouts. They were just small talk, but somehow those brief chats started to feel like more. He was easy to talk to, and I think that's what drew me to him. I was lonely and lost, and I needed someone to fill the growing void in my life. I needed someone to make me feel seen again, like I had an identity outside of being James's wife. Mike wasn't that person. Mike wasn't like James in that he didn't have that constant air of responsibility or that calm, collected demeanor. He was more spontaneous and rugged. In the beginning, that was what appealed to me. It felt exciting and like something new and unpredictable. We became fast friends, exchanged numbers, texted casually, and met up for workouts. Looking back, I can see how quickly that friendship developed. I crossed the line, but at the time I didn't see it, or maybe I didn't want to see it. I started spending more and more time with Mike, convincing myself that it was harmless. After all, I wasn't doing anything wrong. But deep down, I think I knew that I was playing with fire. I was using Mike as a way to escape the dissatisfaction I felt in my marriage. I was so consumed by my own frustration that I didn't realize I was putting a stop to the one thing in my life that had been going well. It's hard to explain, but I started feeling like James was doing too much. He was too romantic, too good, too involved in every aspect of my life. This was at a time when I was already questioning who I was. Having someone who seemed to have it all together made me feel even more out of place. James was the kind of guy who would plan. James was always planning surprise date nights and leaving little love notes around the house. He adored me, and everyone could see it. But instead of appreciating it, I began to resent it. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I felt like he was being too romantic and too caring. I felt like I was suffocating under his constant affection and the weight of our perfect life together. Instead of seeing his love as a gift, I started to see it as a burden. I started to see his love as a burden rather than a gift. I was tired of it. I was tired of James in my mind. I began to twist things. I told myself that he was smothering me and that I needed something different, something more. I started to believe that his love was holding me back from being the person I wanted to be. In reality, James had never once stopped me from doing anything. I let those thoughts take root and grow until they consumed me. Mike became my escape from that. When I was with him, I didn't feel the pressure of being perfect or living up to anyone's expectations. He was fun, carefree, and, most importantly, he didn't expect anything from me. I could be whoever I wanted to be around him, and for a while, that felt liberating. I convinced myself that I thought I needed something different, something less predictable. I thought that by being with Mike I could rediscover the part of myself I felt I had lost. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't just running away from James, I was running away from myself. No amount of time with Mike or anyone else was going to fix that. The more time I spent with Mike, the more distant I became. I came from James. I stopped talking to James about how I was feeling, and stopped sharing the things that were bothering me. Instead, I would keep those conversations for Mike. Gradually, I built this wall between James and me, brick by brick, until there was almost nothing left of the connection we once had. The worst part was that James didn't even realize it was happening. He kept trying, kept showing up, kept loving me. He was trying so hard to fix everything, but nothing was ever going to be fine. I didn't want things to be fixed. I had already checked out emotionally. I just hadn't admitted it to myself yet. It wasn't until I found myself sitting across from Mike at a coffee shop talking about our lives like we had known each other forever that I realized how deep I had gotten myself into this mess. Instead of backing off, I kept going. I told myself that Mike was what I'd been missing all along, that he was the answer to the emptiness I felt. The more time I spent with Mike, the more he showed me a different world, one I hadn't experienced in years, if ever. He introduced me to clubbing and staying out late. Nights out with him became a regular thing, filled with loud music, crowded dance floors, and the rush of being surrounded by people who didn't know me or the life I had with James at the time. I thought this was what I had been looking for. I felt alive, like I was rediscovering a wild, free version of myself that had been buried beneath years of domesticity. I didn't see how destructive it was. I didn't realize that I was getting lost, not found. To me, it felt like I was breaking free from the constraints of my perfect life and the expectations that came with it. That came with being James's wife. Mike gave me a taste of excitement and rebellion, and I drank it up like I was starving for it. The late nights, the parties, the drinking, it all seemed so thrilling, so different from the quiet, steady life I had with James. I thought this was the piece I'd been missing all along. I was seeking adventure, excitement, and freedom, but in reality, I was spiraling and too blinded by the adrenaline rush to see it. The more time I spent with Mike, the more distant I became from James. I started to resent the life we had built together, the home we had carefully put together, the routines we had, the life that I had once found happiness in that life, but now it felt suffocating. I avoided James whenever I could, found excuses not to spend time with him, dodged his attempts at intimacy, and shrugged off his affection. I even started sleeping in a different room, blaming it on needing space, but the truth was I couldn't stand being near him. I couldn't stand being around him anymore. His love, his adoration, his unwavering devotion, it all irritated me to no end. James would come home after a long day at work, still trying to engage with me, still looking at me with that same tenderness in his eyes that used to make me feel so cherished. But now, it only made me feel guilty. I felt really uncomfortable. I couldn't look at him because every time I did, it reminded me of what I was doing behind his back. Instead of facing that guilt, I pushed it down. I buried it beneath more nights out with Mike, more drinks, and more poor decisions. I kept telling myself that this was what I needed, that Mike was what I told myself. James's love wasn't enough, that his kindness was boring, that his stability was a cage. The more I believed those lies, the more I pulled away from him. I stopped being intimate with him entirely. Every touch felt wrong, like I was betraying Mike. Even though it was James, I was already married, and I'd gone too far with Mike. We'd become physical, and I was cheating on James. What started as innocent flirting had quickly escalated. I was sneaking around, meeting Mike at hotels and making excuses for why I was when I got home late. I realized I'd become someone I didn't even recognize. Instead of feeling guilty, I felt empowered. I told myself that this was my choice, and that I was taking back control of my life. I was rewriting my story, or so I thought. But deep down, I think I knew the truth. I knew that what I was doing was wrong. I was hurting James in a way he didn't even know about yet. I knew that the life I was throwing away was worth so much more than the excitement I was chasing with Mike, but I ignored that voice inside me. I drowned it out with every new thing and every new high. It was almost like I was addicted to the rush of it all. All the secret texts gave me this sense of power, this false belief that I was finally living life on my terms. But the reality was that I was running away from myself, from my problems, and from the love that James had given me so freely for so many years. I thought that leaving James would somehow fix everything that was wrong inside me. I had finally reached my breaking point. I couldn't stand James anymore. Every time he looked at me with that same sweet, loving expression, I wanted to scream. I had grown to resent the very things that once made me fall in love with him: his kindness, his patience, his thoughtfulness. I felt like I was trapped in a relationship with someone too good for me. I didn't deserve someone like that. Instead of dealing with that, I convinced myself that he was the problem. I'd been seeing Mike for months, and I was tired of sneaking around and having to pretend that I had checked out of our marriage long ago. I didn't want to be with James anymore, not privately, not publicly. I wanted Mike. I wanted to be with him openly, without having to lie or hide how excited I felt. I didn't care about the consequences. At the beginning, I was too far gone. I stayed with James out of convenience. Let's be honest, leaving isn't easy. James provided me with a comfortable life. He had money, and our lifestyle reflected that. I didn't have to worry about bills or stress about anything financially because James took care of it. I was scared to give that up. Could I really walk away from the stability we had? Could I throw away the life we built together for something as uncertain as an affair? But then I realized that Mike wasn't exactly struggling either. He made good money, not as much as James, but enough that I knew we could live comfortably if I left. It was like a switch flipped in my mind. The idea of leaving didn't seem so impossible. I wasn't going to lose everything. I was just trading one life for another. With that realization, the final wall I had built around myself crumbled. So I made up my mind. I wanted to be with Mike, and not just in secret. I wanted to leave James and be with Mike openly. I felt like I had been holding on to my marriage out of convenience, staying because it was easier than leaving. But once I realized that Mike was financially stable and could take care of me, I finally felt like I had the strength to walk away. I finally had the strength to walk away. I was done with James, and done with pretending that everything was fine. I couldn't wait anymore. I needed to end things with James and move on with my life. I had been dragging it out for too long, convincing myself that I couldn't do it and that it was too hard. I didn't even hold back. I could have been more tactful and considerate in how I told him, but I was at my wit's end. I wanted out and didn't see the point in sugarcoating it to make him feel better. He deserved the truth, and I was going to give it to him, no matter how brutal it was. I said things I fully believe that harsh and hurtful things are not my style. However, in that moment, I felt like I needed to tear everything down to make my decision feel justified. I was fed up with his kindness and how he always tried to make everything perfect. I didn't hesitate to let him know, for the first time in a long time. James looked angry. He was always so calm and collected, even when we had disagreements. He would keep his cool, but now I had pushed him too far. I could see it in his eyes: hurt, disbelief, frustration. This wasn't just another argument, this was the end. It felt like years since we'd actually fought. We had a huge fight. There was yelling and accusations thrown back and forth. James demanded to know why I was doing this, and why I was throwing away everything we had for some guy from the gym. I didn't have a good answer. I couldn't explain why I was willing to destroy the life we built together. I had to justify my actions in a way that made sense, not even to myself. But I didn't stop. I was too far gone, too committed to this path. The argument escalated until finally I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed upstairs, grabbed a bag and started throwing my things into it. I was leaving, that was it. I didn't care what happened next. What happened next was that I just wanted to get out of that house and away from James. I needed to get to Mike to start this new life. I had convinced myself that I wanted James. I watched him as I packed, a mixture of shock and pain on his face. He didn't try to stop me or beg me to stay. I think by that point he realized. There was nothing he could do. I was gone before I ever walked out the door. I left that night. I took my bag, got in my car, and drove straight to Mike's place. I didn't look back. I thought I had made the right choice. I thought I was finally free. Mike was genuinely surprised when I showed up at his doorstep. That night, I hadn't told Mike I was planning to leave James. In fact, we hadn't really discussed what would happen after our secret meetups. I thought I was making the right move, but Mike was unsure of how to react. He eventually accepted it, though. I figured he would. After all, we'd been hiding things from each other for months, and things were getting pretty serious. At least, that's what I told myself. The next few days were a bit of a blur. Everyone in my life tried to reach out and talk me out of what I'd done. My family and friends all urged me to reconsider. They kept telling me I was making a mistake. I made a big mistake by leaving James. I refused to listen to anyone who tried to talk me out of it. I felt like they were all against my happiness. It felt like they were choosing sides, and in my eyes, they were all siding with James. I got really angry. I even started accusing my family, especially my siblings, of I knew that supporting James just because he was wealthy wasn't the whole story. James had always been kind to my family, and had gone out of his way to help them whenever they needed it. They loved him for who he was, not for his money. But I was too caught up and I was so wrapped up in my own narrative that I didn't realize how much everything was sinking in. Mike and I were together, but something wasn't right. Things weren't as perfect as I had imagined. Still, I pushed those thoughts away, convincing myself that everything would fall into place eventually. Then Mike and I went to James's house to collect the rest of my belongings. I dreaded going back there, knowing I'd have to face James again, but it had to be done. When we arrived, James was calm but firm. He allowed me to take my personal items, but made it clear that I couldn't take any of the expensive things he had bought me over the years. At first, I wanted to argue, but I realized I had no right. James had I told myself that everything would work out eventually. Then Mike and I went to James's house to collect the rest of my belongings. I was dreading going back there because I knew I'd have to face James again, but it had to be done. When we arrived, James was calm but firm. He let me take my personal items but made it clear that I couldn't take any of the expensive things he'd bought me over the years: jewelry, designer bags, electronics. At first I wanted to argue, but I realized I had no right to. James had been generous during our marriage and had bought those things for me out of love, but now that love was, all the things that came with it were gone. I didn't fight him on it, maybe I should have, but at that moment I just didn't have the energy to care. Material things didn't seem important anymore. I was just focused on leaving that chapter of my life behind and starting over with Mike, even if I wasn't sure what that meant. Looking back, I realize now how detached I was from reality at that time. I thought that leaving James would solve all my problems. I thought that being with Mike would bring me happiness. But in that moment, as I walked away from the life James and I had built together, I didn't know how. I was wrong. A few weeks after I left James, I got served with divorce papers. I didn't care. I had made my decision, and I was too caught up in the whirlwind of my new life with Mike to be bothered by the legal process. It felt like just another step towards officially closing the door on my old life. My old life was turned upside down when Mike was fired from his job. Things went downhill fast at first. I didn't think much of it, as people lose jobs all the time. However, I later found out that James was at fault. It's hard to believe James didn't have a hand in it. Mike was a great employee, at least according to his colleagues. The workers couldn't understand why James suddenly fired Mike. The only person with the influence and motivation to make something like that happen was James. He worked in cybersecurity and had connections in high places. If anyone could pull some strings and get Mike fired, it was him. I was shocked. I confronted Mike about it, which I realized was a pretty petty and wicked thing to do. There was also another rumor that he had blacklisted Mike, just so it would be hard for him to find jobs and make our lives miserable. It seemed to work, as things went from bad to worse almost immediately after Mike lost his job. His mood shifted, and the carefree fun we had enjoyed together was replaced by stress and irritability. Mike was a great guy, but he was suddenly stressed and irritable. He had a good job, but he never saved money for a rainy day. He was frivolous and wasteful with his spending. He always wanted the latest gadgets, or went out for dinner instead of cooking at home. So when he lost his job, it hit us hard. We could barely afford food. I remember standing in front of the fridge trying to make meals out of random leftovers, while constantly worrying about how we'd pay the bills. It was stressful and frustrating. When Mike lost his job, it hit us hard. In just a couple of weeks, we could barely afford food. I remember standing in front of the fridge trying to make meals out of random leftovers, while constantly worrying about how we'd pay the bills. It was stressful and frustrating. It felt like we were in free fall. I tried to suggest budgeting or cutting back on non-essentials, but he just brushed it off. He insisted he'd find a new job soon. Watching our savings dwindle was terrifying. It made me realize how stupid I was to depend on someone like Mike. I suggested we cut back on non-essentials, but he just brushed it off, insisting he'd find a new job soon. Watching our savings dwindle was terrifying, and it felt like a ticking clock. I felt completely powerless, and it made me realize how stupid I was to depend on someone like Mike. A few months after losing his job, he sat me down and said I was confused, and asked my father what he meant. Mike explained that since he hadn't been able to find work, we should ask my dad to help him get a job. That's when everything started to unravel. Mike had somehow gotten it into his head that I came from money and that my dad was wealthy and could pull some strings. He was trying to get him hired somewhere, thinking I was a trust fund kid or something, and he had been operating under that assumption the whole time. We had a huge argument that night. Mike admitted that part of the reason he had been so eager to be with me was that he believed I had access to family money. We got married and he'd be set financially. I was shocked. I tried to explain to him that I wasn't wealthy at all. All the money I'd been spending during our time together had come from James. It was James who came from a rich family, not me. All the designer clothes, fancy dinners and trips we had enjoyed were because of my ex. Mike was pretty shocked when he found out about my husband's wealth. He couldn't believe it. Then he got really angry. He said I'd wasted his time and that I'd been living off him for nothing. He said he hadn't asked me to contribute to bills because he thought I was trying to see if he was with me for the money or not. He thought I was testing him with reverse psychology. In reality, I just didn't have the money to contribute. I had been living off the remnants of what I had taken from my life with James. That night was the first time I saw the real Mike. He was charming, excited, and fun, but it was like a punch to the gut when I realized he only ever wanted me because he thought I had a big paycheck. I had left the most caring, loving man. Mike kicked me out, saying I was just a meal ticket. He called me a freeloader. I was shocked. Everything had changed overnight. I was living what I thought was the good life with him, and then I was on the street. I tried calling James. I tried to patch things up with Mike, hoping we could talk things through, but he'd blocked me. No texts, no calls, nothing. I felt completely stuck. Then I reached out to my family thinking they'd help, but they ignored me too. It was like I'd burned every bridge. Finally, I had to call my friend Sarah. She was the only one who'd let me crash at her place, but she made it clear it would only be for a short time. I had nowhere else to go but my friend Sarah's, but she made it clear it would only be for a short time. I knew I was in trouble. I've been there for a couple of days and I kept thinking about James. I don't want the divorce anymore. I'm done with Mike and all his drama, but how can I reach James when he wouldn't even? I just wanted to talk to someone. I felt stuck. I decided to post on Reddit because I'm hoping someone might have an idea about what to do next. I just wanted to explain to James that I'd messed up and wanted him back, but I don't know how to get through to him when he had shut me out completely. I need your advice. I want him back, but I'm not sure how to reach him. I'm ready to fight for what we had. What can I do? What should I do? I felt vulnerable exposing my heart to strangers on the internet, but in this moment it feels like the only option I had left. Update: I got flamed on here. I used to think Reddit was helpful, but I was wrong. I posted on the app, but it seems that not many people have helpful advice to offer. My post got a lot of attention, but I didn't receive any useful suggestions. I was told that I was being unrealistic and thinking I could fix things with James, and that I should just accept the situation. I don't want a divorce. How can I make that clear to you? I finally got in touch with him today. Thankfully, he finally answered my calls. We spoke for a long time, but it was clear he didn't want to hear my side of things. He kept saying he was done, and that he was going ahead with the divorce. He told me I'd already been served the papers and there was no going back. I'd made my choice. I even cried on the phone, but he still wouldn't listen to me. I've reached out to my parents and siblings, begging them to help me talk to him, but there's been no change of heart. He's completely closed off. I'm really struggling to know what to do. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I realize now that I miss him. I know it sounds ironic and stupid, especially after how much I mocked him, but I genuinely miss him. I miss everything about us, our late-night talks, his sense of humor, and the way he always made me feel loved. I find it difficult to accept that I drove him away with my words and actions. I had no idea it would come to this. I'm just left feeling empty and regretful, wishing I could turn back time and change how I treated him. I want to fix this, but I don't know how. I keep thinking of ways to reach out to him. I've been trying to reach out to him again, but I'm worried that I'll push him further away. I'm hoping that if I just keep trying, maybe he'll come around, but I'm starting to realize that I might have lost him for good. I don't want to be alone, and I just want a chance to show him that I can change. I've learned so much from this experience. I don't want to have spent all this time and effort for nothing. I just wish he could see that any advice on how to approach this would be greatly appreciated, even if it's just to help me figure out my next steps. Thanks for listening. I haven't updated in a while because I honestly didn't feel the need to. but I keep getting requests for updates, so I thought I'd give you all a quick update on where I'm at. First of all, I'm currently staying at a homeless shelter. I really don't know what to do anymore. My family won't take me in, they keep saying I made my bed and should lie in it. It's heartbreaking to hear that from them. I thought family would support each other, but it feels like they're just highlighting my mistake. I stayed with a friend for a couple of weeks, which was nice, but I couldn't keep imposing on her. I felt bad and eventually I had to leave. Now I'm in this shelter, and it's a tough adjustment. I don't have a lot of friends who are willing to let me stay with them right now, especially since I'm no longer with James and don't have any cash to throw around. It's like I've burned all my bridges. As for James, he's going ahead with the divorce and he's not listening to me. I've tried everything I can think of to reach him. I feel helpless and lost. I really thought we could work things out, but it seems like he's made up his mind and there's nothing I can do to change that. On top of all this, I've started job searching because I know I need to get a job if I'm ever going to leave the shelter. It's overwhelming to say the least. I miss James so much. I regret everything that happened. I messed up and now I'm paying the price for it. I don't really know what my next steps are, but I'm trying to stay hopeful. I've realized just how much I took for granted, and I wish I could go back and change the way I treated him. I guess I'm just looking for some advice or words of encouragement. Anything would help right now. Thanks for reading. Update. Hey Reddit, I haven't updated in a while because I've been really busy. I just kind of got in the way, as they say. Plus, writing this post has been really tough. I kept writing and deleting, stalling and just feeling all over the place. I miss James so much, and I've come to realize that men like him are so rare. I had a great thing, and I threw it away for something so stupid. I get a lot of questions about Mike. Just to clarify, I'm not in contact with him anymore. He blocked me after he kicked me out. I blocked him, and I've never looked back. I really miss James though. I miss everything about him, like how he used to make me laugh, how he was always there for me, and just the comfort of knowing I had someone who cared. I regret messing everything up. I had it so easy, and I threw it all away. As for the divorce, it's finally been finalized. It took a while to get to that point, but in the end, it didn't even take an hour in the courthouse. I ended up with nothing, which I suppose I should have seen coming. We were only married for 4 years, and all of his properties were his premarital assets. Since we didn't have kids or any to split, I didn't qualify for alimony or spousal support. It's been tough, and my family is still distant with me. They've pretty much picked my ex over me, which is hard to deal with. It feels like I've lost not just my husband but my support system as well. On a slightly positive note, just to let you know, I've got a job now, so I'm not completely jobless. I suppose you could say that's a small victory. I'm also staying in a really tiny studio apartment. It's small, like, really small, but it's mine, and I'm trying to appreciate that. It's okay for a first place, I suppose, but sometimes it feels lonely. I'm managing, but every day I regret my choices. I wish I could go back and do things differently. I keep hoping for a way to make it all right, but I'm not sure how.